Welcome back to Together We Awaken, Finding Light in the Dark. I'm Allison Bruner, your soul sister, human guide, and rebirth midwife. This is episode 17, The Softening of the Self, when our coping strategies begin to dissolve. It's something that I have lived through and continue to do so. And I know that many of you are too, even if you don't know what to call it, and even if you're not even aware of it. It's what happens when our old ways of being, what are called character strategies or egoic survival structures, begin to slowly dissolve and have less of a hold over us. These strategies soften slowly and gradually until one day we realize they're no longer running the show. And something deeper and more authentic begins to take their place. If you have been feeling raw, unrecognizable, emotionally upside down, or like parts of you that once worked just don't work anymore, this episode may bring clarity and a tad bit of peace. So, what are character strategies? Let's begin here. In the Hakomi method of mindful somatic psychotherapy, in which I was trained in depth and practiced for 18 years, an approach that draws in part of the work of Wilhelm Reich and Alexander Lowen, there's an understanding that we each develop adaptive strategies early in life. And these strategies are shaped by the relational field, our caregivers, our environment, and our early experiences. They're not pathologies and they're not diagnoses. They're intelligent adaptations. They helped us cope with core wounds and protect ourselves from further pain. Hakomi reframes these patterns through a compassionate lens. Instead of using labels or diagnoses, Hakomi identifies 9 core strategies that are rooted in a basic survival need and corresponding developmental period. And I'm just going to name them for you right now, and then I'll go into them a little bit more later. So they're called the sensitive withdrawn, sensitive emotional, dependent endearing, self-sufficient, which used to be called self-reliant. Some of these names have changed over the years, and I may not be completely up to date, but this is I'm sharing this from my training. Okay, and then we move on to tough, generous, charming, manipulative, overwhelming, endure, actually used to be called burdened enduring, expressive, and I think they call it now busy hyper focused, which used to be called industrious. Each one arises from an early unmet need. And they helped us learn how to move through a world that often didn't feel safe or responsive. These strategies helped us form a coherent sense of self and allowed us to navigate relationships and challenges, though often from a place of self-protection. And they were never meant to be permanent. Maybe back in the day they were, but we're in new times now and in new terrain. They were like scaffolding, not the actual permanent structure of the building, of you. And when we begin to awaken, as we are in these times, spiritually, emotionally, and energetically, these strategies begin to soften and they lose their grip. And that softening can feel like we're unraveling. Or if I'm honest, it can feel kind of destabilizing and scary until you find your new footing again and are used to this new idea that like I was not that. And you feel yourself becoming more real. Let's make something clear. We are not here to get rid of the ego. Teachers, traditionally, spiritual teachers used to say that kind of frame the ego as enemy and that we were here to dissolve the ego. But it's not an enemy. It's a necessary function of being human. It gives us a sense of selfhood and allows us to experience this lifetime as an individual thread in the larger tapestry of oneness. Without the ego, there's so much we wouldn't be able to do as human beings. I think I may have shared this in a past podcast, but I've known of people whose egos dissolved too quickly through certain spiritual practices and they could barely walk, couldn't really even take care of themselves. But egoic structures do evolve and they shift as we grow. And they've been doing that like never before in these times. So the ego built in childhood, rooted in protection and patterning, eventually gives way to something more integrated. And often that transition is catalyzed by spiritual awakening, brought on by something like a serious illness, a heartbreak, loss, or grief, as I've been talking about in the past weeks. And it can feel like you're losing your mind or falling apart. Like the personality you've built is no longer working. But it's not really falling apart. The egoic structure is just changing form. It's transforming. And like the leaves that fall before winter, the old layers begin to shed. A lot of us are in that period right now, shedding. And you're left in this sort of liminal space, not who you were and not quite who you're becoming. You're in a phase of becoming, shedding and becoming. And that's the experience of softening these character strategies. This, eventually, when the time is right, a new egoic structure forms. And it's one that's more rooted in love and presence and deeper connection. In my own journey, I've exhibited many of these strategies, of course. My most prominent was the sensitive emotional strategy. As I said before, I'll get into these a little bit more in a bit, but this is being deeply feeling, easily overwhelmed, especially when others weren't attuned to me as a child. For years, I believed that intensity of emotion meant something was seriously wrong with me. And I longed to be held in my pain because I never really received that as a child, not to the extent that a child needs. Emotions terrified me, dysregulated me, because mine were so strong, and I never had anyone help me to contain them and to soothe them. And then in turn, I would have internalized that and then learned how to soothe myself and contain them myself. So that didn't happen. So I ran as fast as I could from them and became highly anxious, or I was overwhelmed by them and cried easily and quite hard. So I had to learn how to soothe myself. And through my adult years, I had to learn how to hold myself. The more I learned how to hold my own pain and soothe myself, to regulate my emotions, the more clairsentient I became. Isn't that interesting? Something to look forward to if you are as sensitive as I am. I was such a deep, deep feeler that I was able to eventually access the gift that comes from that. Being able to read other people's emotions and to receive messages from spirit through my clear sentience or clear feeling right here in my gut. And as I got older, I adapted the expressive strategy, seeking validation through being magnetic and desirable and interesting. I knew how to capture attention, but I feared rejection. Underneath the confidence that I pretended to have was a tender fear of not being loved. Another shadow aspect of that was inauthenticity and melodrama. After one of my stages of spiritual awakening, it actually made me feel ill using this strategy. I couldn't stomach being inauthentic, but I wasn't sure I'd be loved for who I was, and spent a lot of time alone after spending years as a social butterfly. So then, especially as my extrasensory abilities turned on, I lived inside the sensitive withdrawn strategy. I retreated into solitude and spiritual spaces, disconnected from my body and overwhelmed by the world. This was actually a core wound or core strategy that was hidden beneath all the other ones that made me seem more confident and out there in the world. But with this sensitive withdrawn strategy, it felt safer to just disappear. And I spent those years grounding by lakes and streams, learning how to feel safe in this body, facing terrifying fears around survival and healing old trauma. And I've seen this in my own clients year after year after year, especially like when I would work with them and go into their subconscious and into their underworld, working with an inner child part. A lot of times when they, as the adult, would go to that younger part, I'd say, where is this part right now? What are they doing? And they'd say, oh, he's in a closet. She's hiding up in a tree where no one can see her. And through the years of work with me, which by the way is taking less and less time, it's not taking years anymore because of the times we're in, but the child would slowly come out of the tree or out of the closet and grow to trust the adult. And they're not showing the sensitive withdrawn character strategy to the extent that they used to. And when they get triggered and they want to go into that strategy, they notice it and they're able to hold themselves and stay present and centered. It's really cool how it works. And now I find myself moving through the industrious strategy. It shows up as overworking, striving, constantly trying to prove my worth and feel more secure through output. And I see now how much of that comes from early childhood patterns where being responsible made me lovable. But spirit isn't having that. My soul has been guiding me to relax more into my beingness and out of so much darn doing. One more strategy I've been healing is the self-sufficient one. As a child, I couldn't get all of my emotional needs met, and eventually, to protect myself from the pain of that, decided I would no longer ask for help or lean into support from others. I believed that the support wouldn't be there. So, to protect myself from the pain, I became hyper self reliant. And it burned me out eventually, again and again. I had dreams, actual dreams from my subconscious of being a skeleton, that it was all dried up with nothing left. And I kept giving love to get love. I kept giving and nurturing others to compensate for my inner child feeling left out in the cold. It affected me financially and it damaged my body. And I'm still recovering from that and finally making sure that I tend to me before anybody else. I exhibited other strategies as well to a degree. In fact, I was very adept at hiding the dependent strategy, even though my fears of abandonment were visceral. And I'll leave that one for another day. But it was, in fact, another stage of awakening and several mystical experiences with Kuan Yin that helped to heal this one. In fact, we can dip into all of the strategies. Each time one of these softens, or for me has softened, something inside me shifted. And I felt disoriented for sure at first, like I didn't know who I was anymore. But slowly, with compassion, a truer self began to emerge. More of my higher self could fill in where the masks were being burned. So let's take a closer look at each of the core strategies. They're not pathologies, they're survival blueprints. And you may recognize yourself in several of them. Most people do. And these are by no means comprehensive in their descriptions. Pages have been written about each one. So this is very, very brief. The sensitive withdrawn is often rooted in early rejection, neglect, or trauma. And the child develops core beliefs that can include, I'm unsafe, I don't belong, or something is wrong with me. And the behaviors can look like emotional withholding, social avoidance, and physical contraction. When this softens, there's a return to a grounded presence and safe connection. Then there's the sensitive emotional, which is formed in response to inconsistent caregiving, alternating warmth and hostility, and beliefs like nothing is safe or calmness is dangerous. And the behaviors can include hypervigilance and emotional overwhelm or panic. And then when this softens, self-regulation and empowerment becomes possible. Dependent endearing arises from emotional or physical deprivation. And it carries beliefs like, I don't matter, or everyone will abandon me. And behaviors can include clinginess, people pleasing, and fear of solitude. And when this softens, there's space for inner strength and secure attachment. And then there's the one called self-sufficient that when I was trained was called self-reliant. And this one's born from being punished or shamed for needing help. This strategy leads to beliefs like, I can't rely on anyone, or needs are weakness. Behaviors can include over responsibility, emotional detachment, and reluctance to ask for help. We see these people often in the parking lots of the grocery store where someone says, "Can I help you carry that?" And they go, "No," even though it's clear they could use the support. And when this softens, it allows for the experience of support and emotional intimacy. The tough, generous strategy developed in environments where vulnerability was unsafe or exploited. Beliefs like um, vulnerability is dangerous or I must control to survive often form. And behaviors can look like over giving, being overly generous, controlling, having controlling tendencies or emotional suppression. And when this softens, authenticity and true giving can flourish. And the charming manipulator is created when autonomy was suppressed. Core beliefs might be honesty leads to rejection or punishment. I must trick others to get my needs met. And behaviors can include flattery and charm and strategic emotion. And when this softens, honesty and real connection become accessible. And then there's the overwhelming or endurer, what I was trained to call burdened enduring. This one originates in punishment for having needs and feelings, and it can include, my needs are burdensome, or I must obey to be loved. This one's very much about obeying, and these children often come from very oppressive family or households. Behaviors can include chronic compliance, emotional numbness, and fear of conflict. And when this softens, self-expression and boundaries can emerge. The expressive strategy arises from being dismissed or ridiculed for emotional expression. And core beliefs might include, no one really listens, or I have to fight for love. And behaviors can include dramatic expression and fear based attachment. And when this softens, um, deeper self worth and a more calm presence can develop. And then the busy or hyper focused strategy, or what I was taught as the industrious strategy, was formed in high pressure environments where worth was based on output. Like I was often made to clean the house a lot, and in school, to get straight A's, and I would find my worth in that, being the best at everything. And beliefs can include rest is failure, or I must earn love through performance. And the behaviors can include perfectionism and overworking and avoidance of rest. And when this softens, rest and play and ease return. These are like archetypes. They are not boxes. They're here to help you understand and not to limit you. You are not your strategy. You're the one awakening beyond it. We all soften at different speeds. Some of us choose a slow path that's gentling and kind of like spiraling and tender. And others chose the fast track through collapse, crisis, and rebirth. And, some of mine took decades. There's no right way. There's no award for getting there quickly. This is not a race. It's like a return to wholeness. And it's not that we're not already whole, but we're returning to our original blueprint and embodying more of our higher self. There's nothing shameful about a character strategy. There is nothing wrong with it. And I am not encouraging you to make any of them go away. I am encouraging you, in fact, to honor them. They got you to where you are now. So if you're aware of them, thank them. Thank yourself for loving yourself so much that you developed these strategies to survive adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And sometimes what feels like a breakdown as we're going through this is actually the breakthrough. Sometimes what looks like, I always say failure because that's what it felt like to me, is really the moment that you stop pretending and you start healing. Your soul knows the way and is guiding you. So you don't have to force this. And your body will show you the pace. So listen and trust and soften where you can and don't where you can't. And be gentle with the rest. There are modalities of healing like somatic experiencing and the Hakomi method. And I'm trying to remember the others off the top of my head. I'm not, oh goodness, there's another one. Is it sensory processing psychotherapy? Eek! I don't remember, but maybe I'll find it and put it in the comments. There aren't many therapists in that modality that I'm aware of, especially in Pennsylvania. But these modalities can help you to soften in each of your strategies so that you're more mindful of them and can make conscious choices in how to respond to triggers in your life versus reacting and allowing your wounds to lead you. Some of this, for many of you, is happening on its own, just as a result of what we're living through right now. And it's not an easy process. It's not. It's not for the faint of heart. And yet here you are. And what I'm also saying here today in this podcast as well is something I've never heard a therapist agree with me about. You know, they say we'll always have our core wounds and our strategies, and never to try and get rid of them. And I'm not saying get rid of them. I'm not saying that they won't. I'm not saying that they won't always be here. What I'm saying is, from personal experience, that dissolution, little by little, is possible. I've seen it with my own eyes. As I've said earlier, my expressive strategy dissolved completely. It now makes me sick to even think of trying to use it. And 10 years ago, last month, I remember after a stage of awakening, dropping a giant container of talcum powder in the hallway of my apartment. And instead of hurriedly trying to pick it up and clean it so I could appear like a good girl, a responsible person, or a perfect tenant, I laughed and realized it had nothing to do with me and my worth, whether I picked it up and cleaned it or not. I let it sit there for a couple of days as kind of like a joke with myself until my cats started tracking through they started tracking the powder through my home and I wasn't sure if that was good for them. So I cleaned it up. And that was the softening. I'm not saying the dissolution, but it was a softening of industriousness, my perfectionism, and also my people pleasing from the burdened strategy. I am still working with it. It's still here. Will it dissolve completely? I don't know. I'm walking with you through this. But I'm here to say there's something to this whole spiritual awakening and the changing or softening of these strategies. I came up with this metaphor yesterday when sitting in a creek with a friend. The water was gently flowing over rocks that had probably been there for 100 years or more. And the more that water flowed, the fewer imprints the rocks held. The rocks became smoother over time. We too lose those trauma imprints over time. But the information about what had occurred there stayed in the rocks. They held the stories, and they were changed by them, and they were less rough now, smoother. They're still the same rock, but as they allowed the flow of water, or as we allow the flow of spirit unimpeded to wash over and within us, we soften. And we keep the wisdom we've attained from living our stories. We're no longer triggered as easily and no longer reactive. Let's take a moment to pause and take a breath and ask yourself, which strategies do I relate to that point my attention in the direction of what within me needs more love and self-compassion because there was an unmet need in childhood or a wound? What part of me is softening right now? What survival strategy might be losing its grip? Can I stop seeing it as a problem or something to fix? And instead of trying to will myself to be different, can I ask myself what I need or part of me needs to no longer engage in the strategy? Where is the hurt part of me that believed it needed that strategy? Can I go to it and give it what it needs from me? If you need help with this, one, stay tuned. I am working on some offerings that I'll release in the future. I am going very slow in the creation as I am, again, releasing the industrious strategy and others and tuning into my body and taking care of myself every day. Normally, I'd have this stuff cranked out very quickly, but these offerings are to come in perfect divine timing. But also, you can join my healing circle called the Hearth. More on that in a little bit, but ask yourself, what becomes possible when I no longer need to use the strategy? Who am I then? Remember many episodes ago, I was saying, if you didn't have your first name, your last name, your past, your future, who would you be? You're embodying more of that. But with these questions I've asked, you don't need answers right away. We're simply cultivating awareness. The softening is happening. Just let yourself witness it. And once again, if this episode spoke to something in you and you feel yourself softening too, I'd love to invite you to the Hearth, my sacred group healing space, where we gather to receive and release and remember who we are beyond our coping strategies. The next open circle is on Monday, August 4th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can use the code WELCOME for $50 off your first circle or friend if you're bringing someone along. Details are on my website. Until next time, keep listening to yourself. Keep holding the hurt parts of you with love. They will metamorphose, and try not to force change. Be present with what needs you. Love yourself even more, and then together we all awaken.
With you I feel myself soften and shake. Been good, been bad, been hard to break. With you I feel myself